think it's going to be easier for new Angular developers to transition between frameworks. So if they're coming from something like Vue, or maybe if they're using Next.js, I think it's going to be easier for them because of these new things. Standalone components specifically, you won't have to deal with modules anymore. Angular is actually recommending standalone components from the get-go now, which is great. The new control flow, new state management, and even some of the other things that we talked about, or maybe didn't even mention about signals, like the computed signals and effects and things like that. I think it's going to be easier for them to transition. It's just the Angular take on those versus what kind of now seems like an outdated system with our star syntax for the structural directives and how we used to handle modules and stuff like that.
Braydon Coyer talks about using Angular signals for better state management and DOM performance. Learn about how signals simplify development and improve your code's readability.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Modern Web Podcast. I'm your host, Rob Ocel, the VP of Innovation at This.Labs. Today, I am happy to be joined by my co-hosts, Adam Rackis. Adam, how you doing today?
How's it going? Thank you.
Good. As well as Danny Thompson. How are you doing today?
Hey, happy to be here.
Yeah. Very excited to sit down today. We're going to be talking to Braydon Coyer. Braydon is the senior front-end developer at LogicGate. Braydon, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me on.
Yeah, we're so excited. We have so many cool topics to talk about today. And first and foremost is, guys, I don't know if you've heard about this, but there's a renaissance going on in the Angular world. So while we argue about whether or not we are happy with the state of React and Vercel's taking over the world, over in Angular world, everybody's the happiest they've been in years. Braydon, how are you doing? What are your thoughts on kind of the new stuff with Angular? What's been out? What have you been using? What have you been liking?
Yeah, I'm super excited because we use Angular at my job. And I think when I joined, we were using Angular, it was probably like Angular 7 or Angular 8. And we've been slowly like trying to get up to date with all these new releases. So all the stuff that's coming with like Angular 17, Angular 18 is super exciting to us. We can't wait to start getting our hands on it. We just actually merged our bump to version 17. So now we can start using things like signals and some of the other great stuff coming down the pipeline. So signals specifically, I'm super excited for.
Yeah, tell us a little bit more about those. Like, have you guys started using them in your code? And if so, what are the parts that have really made an impact so far?
I think we're using them this sprint. Is like we're trying to get a test MR up with some signals. So for those who don't know, like signals just are a new way to track state. So they like wrap a value and then inform consumers anywhere in your app when that value changes. So it can store like numbers, strings, simple things like that, and even more complex things like data structures. So the reason why signals are so exciting to me right now is because they give us like a really big boost in like DOM efficiency, because Angular can kind of like scrutinize the DOM closely with these signals and these values, and then update that DOM only where it needs to, which has kind of been a challenge for our current change detection system that we've had for so long, right? Years and years. So I think signals are super exciting, and they're probably going to become the go-to for tracking state in a reactive way in Angular from now on.
So I guess, what problem do you think signals are solving that other state management solutions weren't able to solve with Angular in particular? And since you've been utilizing it, have you had any like aha moments? This is great. Now things are finally like ramping up to the way that I was hoping they would.
Yeah, well, like I mentioned, right? So signals, it's going to allow us to make those changes to the DOM more efficiently and not have to deal with all of our change detection issues. So I think that's kind of where it comes into play. So I think most of our state will now be transferred over to signals. I think, phase one for us as we kind of start to adopt this is new code will probably be using signals. We'll see how it goes. Maybe we'll go back and refactor and use signals throughout the rest of our code base. But it'll be interesting to see. And I think as time goes on and we see how signals can be used in different patterns and stuff like that, it'll be interesting to see where we go. Like, are we going to use data stores? How are we going to use it with data stores? There's some articles out there already that I think are really insightful. But I think as time goes on and as new signals become more supported and graduate like the developer preview, I don't know. It's exciting to see where it goes.
The part that's interesting to me with signals as well is that, previously, right, we've been using, or at least currently, we're using Zone.js to do a lot of that change detection. And
Right.
what an amazing library that's been for the community for a long time. I mean, really one of the underappreciated stars of certainly Angular as it is now. But what's really cool about the signals is that you're going to be able to use them in utilities. That's the thing that's really got me, is like the same way that people have sort of been used to create custom hooks or use the Vue like reactivity APIs and those kind of things to be able to build utilities that you can share that still have all the reactivity in them. Like, I am loving that as a potential use case for signals and what kind of utilities people are going to start creating based on them.
Yeah. Well, and the syntax is so much easier to understand too, right? Like if you lean too heavily into RxJS, it can be a little daunting, I think, for newcomers kind of onboarding onto an Angular application. Signals simplify things a lot and still provide a reactive way to update our template. So, yeah, I'm excited.
Yeah, I love that when Signals came out, everyone was like, "Ooh, Ben Lesh, they're getting
Yeah.
rid of RxJS." Ooh, there is nobody more excited about Signals than Ben Lesh is, because I think he has said from day one that RxJS is not a state management solution.
Exactly.
That it's it's meant to be used for events. So there is nobody that's been banging on the drum of making Signals more standardized than he has been. I think he's very excited about them.
Yeah, I had the opportunity to meet Ben at that conference in Austin in January this past year, and so we were able to kind of talk about Signals and RxJS, and he brings up a good point too. I think as far as distinguishing, like, when should we use RxJS, when should we use Signals, and his kind of take is that like our RxJS observables should really be used for like events and cancellation of events, whereas Signals really should just be used for like state management. And then you can transpose Signals into observables and things like that when you need to. But he kind of has some really good slides online somewhere which give a good rundown of his opinion on, hey, RxJS is great for these scenarios, Signals are good for over here, right? So
let's go back to Angular for a moment. You mentioned that Signals makes life more simple. Can you talk about that a bit? My understanding of Signals is that it's mostly purely a perf win. The one Signals sort of addition that I'm familiar with is Svelte. It actually made Svelte just a teeny tiny bit more complicated to use, but it resulted in massive performance wins and massive reliability wins. Is that just what it is in Angular, or did it also, in addition to that, make it simpler to use as well?
yeah, so I think the performance wins are pretty obvious. I think from a developer standpoint, readability is going to improve a lot for repos that use RxJS for like a lot of state management as well, right? So that's where it's going to come into play, where we can kind of really separate all of that, and readability is going to be improved drastically. And it's kind of effortless too with how Signals will integrate with the template. So updates will happen automatically if things are used correctly. So we'll kind of be able to go ahead and split that.
That's interesting. So what I'm hearing is that Angular developers used to be sort of reduced to using Rx.js for state management, and now that's going to be alleviated with Signals. Surely Angular shipped with some sort of state management. Was it just really bad and devs hated it and they used Rx to fill that hole?
Yeah, so I don't think every developer will lean too heavily on RxJS for state management, although I think there can be a tendency. I've seen a lot of repos where RxJS is used for everything. Angular will allow support for state management with NGRX, which is kind of like their version of Redux, right? But it was kind of cumbersome. They've made some improvements along the way now. But now with Signals, how does that play into state management solutions at a global level? There's some articles I think I mentioned earlier, really cool, some really cool ideas, maybe using a signal-based store and things like that. So as the landscape evolves, it'll be exciting to see how things change.
But I feel like it's very common in Angular, though. I thought it was maybe the default that people are building services that have observables and behavior subjects as the storage unit of the data.
Yep.
And people, because like Angular went kind of all in on RxJS, so you don't really have promises so much in the base framework implementations. Like things come in over HTTP in observable form. And so data is just moving around as combinations and merges of observables. And so the common use case is just always to have async pipes everywhere. It's like the first thing you have to learn as an Angular dev is use the async pipe, use the async pipe. And at minimum, this is going to make, like you said, more readable, because you're not constantly worrying about like, where are my async pipes, what's disposed of, what's hot, what's cold, what's open, these types of things. So for that, I agree with you. I think it's in the Angular space, it's going to be way more than just performance. I think for the base use cases, the overwhelming majority of normal use cases, I think it's going to be just a total win.
Yeah, I love that. And then you think about the unit testing side as well. Testing observables is a marathon, right? It can be
Marvel testing.
It can be hard. And so now with Signals, I think things are going to get a lot easier. Hopefully, kind of pull people in to add more supporting test cases for their code. So I think win-win all around.
Cool. Well, there's other parts of Angular too that are really exciting. I mean, there's the control flow syntax for the HTML stuff. There's obviously standalone components. You said your team's really getting a chance to dig into this stuff now. Do y'all have a plan on what you're going to be doing? Like, are you going to be allowing people to use the new stuff in new components? Are you going to stick with a consistent strategy? Are you going to refactor all the old stuff? Like, how are you guys choosing to look at it? I don't think
we'll go back and refactor necessarily, but I think that as these new features kind of graduate the developer preview and become more widely supported, we're going to absolutely going to adopt them in our workflow. So we're going to be doing trainings at work, informing developers of all these new, features that are coming out to improve our DX. So that'll be really interesting. The control flow you mentioned, I think that might be one of my favorites. You want to talk about improving readability? This is great. So this new control flow, we're now moving away from the sometimes hard to remember star syntax of our directives. Our structural directives like ngIf and ngFor and our switch cases and things like that. So hard to remember. Now we're kind of becoming more aligned with other frameworks and libraries like React and stuff, where you have your logical conditions in your JSX. So now we have that in our template as well. And so now it's literally just the @ symbol for, or if you need to add an if statement, you can do that as well. You're using curlies and braces and all of that. So very much more aligned with what developers would use in the template, in the TypeScript file. So if you're writing conditionals there. So super excited. And the new for block as well. I don't know if you read this. They said that the new for loop in our template in some cases can have performance improvements up to like 90%. So huge benefits there. So we're really excited about the control flow at work as well.
So I've got a question. We're making references sometimes, like even just now, to like React. And with some of the improvements in Angular, I started my career as an Angular developer. I haven't touched it in a little while. But with standalone components and it's reducing the need on like ng modules, and Signals reducing the need for obviously like more complex state management. Do you think these innovations and maybe the trend that Angular seems to be going in is trying to make it maybe more accessible, or maybe make the learning curve a little bit easier for people that are trying to jump into the Angular ecospace?
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about. I mean, I think so. I think it's going to be easier for new Angular developers to transition between frameworks. So if they're coming from something like Vue, or maybe if they're using Next.js, I think it's going to be easier for them because of these new things. Standalone components specifically, you won't have to deal with modules anymore. Angular is actually recommending standalone components from the get-go now, which is great. The new control flow, new state management, and even some of the other things that we talked about, or maybe didn't even mention about Signals, like the computed signals and effects and things like that. I think it's going to be easier for them to transition. It's just the Angular take on those versus what kind of now seems like an outdated system with our star syntax for the structural directives and how we used to handle modules and stuff like that.
I'll say from the conversations we've had with the core team, I mean, they definitely do want to lower the skill floor, the amount of things that you have to know to write your first Angular component. That's definitely part of it. But here's the even better part of it all, right? Is that ultimately what we're seeing is one of the healthiest framework governance models that we've maybe ever seen. Just like kind of the sort of React suspense and the server components piece that's just was stretching for years and years and years. Angular had the same thing with Ivy, their new compiler that just took years to come out, and the framework stagnated as a result. Well, since then, the team has just doubled down. They do twice a year releases, and they just have a roadmap, and they just churn on the biggest pain points for the community. And so the net result of like 3 straight years, or like 6, 7, 8 releases of just hitting the biggest pain points for the community has just produced a euphoria in the community. So I don't think they're trying to make it more like React or more like anything else. They're just saying, listen, we hear you, the things that are painful, and we're just going to keep every 6 months giving you 3 new cool things.
Yeah, and you love to see it, right? I mean, even on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it, Angular's been trending. I've noticed the last couple weeks because all these things are being announced for version 18, things like that. So I think people are really starting to take notice, and it's been great as an Angular developer to get all these things now coming down the pipeline. I appreciate all the Ivy work and everything, and now we get that benefit, and now some developer experience improvements. I mean, it's a great time to be an Angular developer.
Before we continue, I wanted to take a second to thank our sponsor, This.Labs. This.Labs is a consultancy focused on helping companies with their digital transformation efforts. And that might sound like a buzzword, but what it means is helping companies align their business objectives with their digital efforts, whether that be replatforming, modernizing, or spinning up new projects. This.Dot has worked with companies like Stripe, Xero, Wikimedia, DocuSign, and Twilio. Check them out at this.co. That's THISDOT.co. All right. Well, listen, I mean, we had a great conversation about Angular. I think another topic that's been sort of interesting, Braydon, I know you've been working on doing some hiring recently and sort of having to tackle the ideas on, how do we hire these days now that AI in all of its forms, especially the LLMs, are out there and available? How do we adjust what we're looking for? So just kind of curious, what kind of experiences did you have? What are sort of some of your initial thoughts on kind of hiring in the age of AI?
Ooh, yeah. Yeah, that's a good question. We actually just hired a few new devs, and it was something that that we were trying to keep, in the forefront of our minds, kind of going through this. Now, the way that our interview process works is we send developers home with a take-home interview, and then we'll bring them back, and we'll have a few small rounds with them, having them talk through their code submission, meeting other team members, things like that. But one of the things that, might come along with a take home is maybe people putting in your challenge to ChatGPT or something, right? And so how do you deal with that as you interview candidates, and how do you kind of spot that? Now, I know there's tools out there, like you can copy paste code, you can put it in a ChatGPT variant, right? And it'll be like, oh, well, based on this, maybe there's like a 70% chance that this was generated using a model or something. But I'd love for this to be like kind of an open discussion, because I don't know if we have a really good answer. And maybe there's some practical things that you could do. Like if you have a take home, maybe you also have like an in-person round where you kind of maybe pair program on something to kind of get a better idea of the capabilities of a candidate. But as you guys have interviewed too, have you thought about this? Like I said, I don't know if we have a really good solution, but it is something that I feel like everybody's dealing with now. And so how do you kind of justify all of that, and how do you work around it?
I can tell you my favorite interview that I've done so far, and I've only ever had this kind of interview once, was at AutoZone, actually. And the task was, it's a live coding assessment, essentially. But you're given the task to build something that's existing on the website currently. So it's an actual work task. It's not something made up. It's explained in a way, at first instance listening to it, you're like, oh, this is going to take no time at all. But as you start peeling back layers, you're realizing, whoa, I only have an hour to do this. It's almost impossible for me to finish this within this hour. So I'm freaking out now, saying I'm not going to have a complete task done in an hour. Unbeknownst to me at that time, the goal is never to finish it within an hour. It's impossible to finish it within an hour. But they want to see how you deal with that pressure in real time, while also vocalizing what you're doing, your thought process, and building this thing out. It was probably one of the best interview process. Regardless if you use AI, they want you to use Google. You can use whatever you want. They're evaluating you in real time. I feel like AI or not, you can't really beat that one or hack that one. But that's probably going to be the best way to figure out, is this somebody that I want to work with on the team? And I feel like that's a great way to kind of realize that.
I would echo pretty much everything Danny said. So to more directly answer Braydon's question, I mean, I don't think you'll like my answer is don't do take-home tests. They were never good, and in the AI era, they're all but unsustainable. They don't work anymore. So that makes your job harder as a hiring manager, which sucks. But you got to just review those resumes, find who you think is worth talking to, and then actually talk to them, and then do some live coding with them. Hiring is even less automatable, if that's a word, now that AI exists, which might be a good thing. I don't think take-homes were ever a good approach, in my opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I forget where I read this, but something that I was thinking about bringing to the team is, if let's say we want to join a take-home with also a paired programming interview later. So maybe round one is like this take-home, regardless of your thoughts, like maybe, and I know everybody's in different situations. I know when I interviewed for LogicGate, we just had a newborn. It was almost impossible for me to find time to like do an interview, as weird as that sounds, right? If you have kids, right? And so I did the take home, and it was really helpful. Now I think that was before ChatGPT, but maybe it still has a spot. I don't know. I think we could debate about that. But then if you do a paired programming interview, I saw somebody say that maybe we should have an engineer from the company pair with this candidate, and they both work on a problem that they've never seen before. So it's live, and the candidate doesn't have any idea of the problem going into it, and also the engineer at the company doesn't too. And so they both have to work together, and so that gives the engineer an opportunity to really kind of see how the candidate thinks through things, because now they really have to think through things too, right? Maybe the candidate will actually help them solve something because they hadn't seen it before either. So I don't know, that could be an interesting way to handle it as far as in-person interviews, maybe pair programming.
Hey, Adam, I'm going to interview you. I'm going to ask you this question. Oh, snap. I don't know. I could just see so much surprise happening. I'm bad at hiding that stuff. So I could just see me saying something inappropriate by accident.
I know, that's high risk. Like the engineer gets the question for the first time. I was like, what is this shit? This is a terrible question. Who's picking this crap?
But maybe it's something more, if you pay the candidate for their time, maybe it could be something for the company even. I don't know. Practical, real world. So maybe the context is there for the engineer, but I find a lot of engineers who perform these paired programming interviews, they've got one solution memorized in their mind, and sometimes it can be hard to like think through different solutions, right? So maybe there's a benefit there.
I feel like the only thing that I dislike about that idea is when I'm going into a technical interview and I need to perform for the company to showcase something, oftentimes I will leverage the person that is interviewing me by discussing the problem overall, maybe asking for suggestions. Obviously, they can't give me the solution, but they can nudge me in a certain direction that's helpful, right? So that way I can perform at the best of my abilities. If they don't know what's going on, then it's going to be really hard for them to nudge me in a direction that makes sense for the both of us.
I agree with that, and I was having similar thoughts. Just like take a step back, for me at least. I can't speak for anyone else. Like day to day, I'm spending pretty much zero time pair programming. Like the extent of my pair programming is, hey, I need some help with this. I don't know how this works. Do you have 10 minutes to pair? And then we get unblocked, and then we go our separate ways. So to have an interview around a sort of contrived pair programming session, I feel like you might not be getting that candidate's natural. You're not going to be well positioned to evaluate their skills, I don't think. I think the tradition of just, here, code this up and I got your back and I'll unblock you if you need it. Or maybe that's what you meant by pair programming, because that kind of is what I use pair programming for. So maybe, I think I may just have been taking pair programming a little bit too literally.
But like, how many times at work are you working and your boss is sitting in the room staring at you and waiting?
True. Yeah.
Watching. It's like there's so much of this process is just trading, picking your biases, I guess, picking the situation you want to put people into that is not their optimal situation.
How many times does your boss just randomly be like, hey, tell me about a time in your past when you had to deal with some conflict?
Right.
Well, because I mean, like like that's my question is a lot of these big companies are using whiteboarding interviews, right? And that's mostly, well, realistically, it's testing your ability to cram, but it purports to test your ability to do problem solving and algorithmic thinking, which at least will be at the fundamental building blocks of what you're doing at work, even if not in your day-to-day, moment-to-moment work.
I wonder how much whiteboarding is a thing anymore, because I think remote may have fixed that. I think it's all CoderPad now, isn't it? Which is great. I hope.
What I
I've
had
not
to
had
do
to do
for a
one in
couple
a hot minute,
companies
so I'm a
is
little out of date.
Google Docs.
Oh,
Just
really?
typing
In
everything
Google-
in a Google Doc.
Oh,
They don't want you to have
yikes.
intelligence. Yeah.
Yikes. I don't know
Unfortunately,
about
yeah.
that.
Go in a Club Penguin and shout it in the town square.
Right?
Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. Like to me, like first of all, I guess we can all agree, and we all seem to agree, that if your hiring process is concerning itself with trying to prevent people from using AI during it, you've lost. That ship has sailed. Like that box is opened; it cannot be reclosed. So, I was kind of funnily enough thinking about the opposite, which is that maybe not a lot of people are doing it these days, but I think it's not going to be long before part of the hiring process is screening for people who are using AI effectively, and that somebody might lose a job opportunity because they're not using AI well.
Right.
You know, on the idea of, I guess in some of the same ways that people used to complain if people used a lot of GUIs or whatever and couldn't do command line, like you're just giving up a lot of efficiency in that situation.
You've really touched on something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, and number one, I think we all, especially if you look at social media, they love harping on the idea that the interview process is broken and which is everyone's open to their opinions. I definitely think the interview process can be improved. I think everybody feels that way one way or another. But I have thought and wondered if we find ourselves in an interview process or exercise where they're saying, I want you to use AI to build this thing, and I want to see how effectively you're breaking your problem down and prompting it to build said solution. Because I feel like even if you're breaking down things for a prompt, it doesn't necessarily just equate to an AI problem, but how effective are you at translating business requests into requirements? And so it could be a good way to kind of think about that. That may end up becoming something that I see like even on the junior side of things, because I think all organizations have to realize that juniors are using AI one way, shape, or form, much less seniors and ICs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, we're using AI at my company, right? So developers have Copilot, and it's great. And so just like I wouldn't necessarily keep someone from using Google during an interview, how can that translate over to AI? You know, do we not allow them to use AI, or we allow them to use it, but based on what they're using it for, does that somehow give us an idea of their level? Things like that, right? And I know even like Cursor now. Have you guys seen Cursor,
Yeah.
the new IDE? Right, that thing is crazy awesome, and it can like generate stuff for you, not just in your file that you're working in other files as well. And so, you know, at what point do you like put a stop on it, or do you just let it go? I mean, at some point you have to test a candidate's ability to problem solve and stuff like that. So it'll be interesting to see how it evolves. Everything's a tool, right? So
Yeah.
we just have to see how it plays out.
Problem
There
solving,
are-
sure, but I think like I guess there's some part that I just have realized, I guess from the hiring side of things, that there is no way in an hour, or even if your interview is longer than that, that you're going to honestly get a divine out how good that person is at coding. Like, let's be realistic here. Like, their exact coding level, there's no way. You're getting hits of people's coding style, right? Like, if anybody's done hiring, like, so much of what you get is that pattern matching, like that sense of who somebody is. It's a bit like with reading someone's writing sample, right? It's not the exact words and exactly what's stated that's necessarily going into your mind. It's the command of the language, the ability to construct something, right, that makes sense. And I think that's ultimately what's getting out of it. And AI will maybe help you with that in the long, you know, at some points. But it's also like, if you've ever gotten a writing sample from somebody that was written almost exclusively by AI, nowadays it's one of the most obvious things. And if it's not
writing,
already that
sure.
way with code, it will be that way with code. And
Yeah.
so, you know, yes, use it as a tool to increase your efficiency, but I feel like this will eventually come out in the wash. But I mean, Adam, to your point, it's probably going to have to be the case that if you're not already doing it in your process, you have to put more face-to-face discussions about problems or systems or code in order to get those same same signals out of somebody and suss that out from the AI pieces.
That's the antidote. I mean, if you're doing CoderPad, you are watching every character that the candidate types. So it would, I mean, if you just see a big like block of code paste in immediately, you're gonna be like, oh, okay, you copied that from ChatGPT. This interview's over. But if they just start flowing and coding it up and talking through their thought process, be like, okay, now I have to use this. I'll reduce this and blah blah blah, and they code it up and it's like good, and they finish the interview in 20 minutes when they had an hour. You can reasonably infer that they're probably pretty decent engineer, or they're really good at just copying what's over on the GPT on the other window. Hopefully not.
Yeah, exactly.
Or they're good at studying, though. That's always the thing that's crazy to me, right? Is like when they're like, people are saying, oh, you want to go to get a job at FANG? Oh, you got to take the course to crack the interview process. Like people aren't just going in with their raw skill level. Like even the people that are some of the people you would respect as being the most skilled people are all studying before they go into those interviews. Like that's a big, I mean, it's kind of funny part of it, right? Nobody is ever more knowledgeable about algorithms than they are just before they go into a job interview. And, right. And they're probably nobody's worse than just before you quit your current job. Oh, okay. Well, since this will have to be edited anyways, little pause here. No last thoughts from anybody?
It's up to y'all. We're between this time and that time, we're at 31 minutes. So I figured we could wrap it up, or we can talk for a couple more. It's up to you.
No, that's fine. All right. Well, very rapidly, we find ourselves nearing the end of our conversation. Braydon, for people that are interested in keeping this conversation going, I mean, goodness, we had all this kind of takes, and we didn't even get to the Tailwind stuff. I guess that's going to be for episode 2.
There you go.
So if you want to talk about Tailwind as well as Angular and AI and hiring, Braydon, where can people find you online?
Yeah, so I run a blog at braydoncoyer.dev. There's a few ways to get in contact with me there, or on Twitter as well at Braydon Coyer. So pretty active on there. Always looking for new people to talk to communicate with. Love to reach out.
Wonderful. Well, that is going to be it for us today. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this Modern Web Podcast. Thank you to our guest, Braydon. As always, we say the conversation does not stop here. You can find Braydon on Twitter, as you heard, at Braydon Coyer. You can find me online at Rob Ocel. As for Adam, you can find him online at Adam Rackis. And for Danny, you can find him online at DThompsonDev. As for the podcast, you can find us online at moderndotweb.com or on Twitter at modern.web. And as we close out, we'd like to thank today's sponsor, This.Labs, one last time, who would like me to remind you that sometimes it's hard to bridge the gap between business objectives and tech implementation, and it can get messy. This dot is trusted by top names like Meta, Google, and T-Mobile, and they love helping business leaders fulfill their strategic digital initiatives. Check them out at thisdot.co. That one more time, that's THISDOT.co. Thanks, everybody. See you next time.
Cheers.
Thanks, y'all.